Hello friends. So today I'll be talking about this very important topic which is commonly asked in the exams, and this topic is a bit sort of a dry topic, and I find students struggling to understand the concepts of this cardiac output, so which could be tricky unless we are doing it every day to understand the practical nuances of cardiac output. So in this talk, I'll try to touch base with all the different modalities that are available for cardiac output. So extremely useful for all the ICU trainees to understand certain basic principles of how to go about doing this cardiac output monitoring. What is the principle behind it, and what may be the factors that are confounding the measurements of cardiac output. So the topics that I would cover is physiological determinants and confounders of cardiac output. Then we would talk about measured determinants and confounders of cardiac output. Then we would look at there are invasive modalities of monitoring cardiac output and there are non-invasive modalities. So in invasive, we'll talk about thermodilution techniques, which is the standard way of measuring cardiac output. And now we are moving more towards non-invasive and analysis of arterial waveform and electrical bioimpedance. So these are sort of an invasive tools. Although bioimpedance involves placement of the electrodes, but it does give a small electric current, so that may be a little painful. So that's why I put it under invasive. So now, generally, our whole movement is towards non-invasive estimation of cardiac output. So some of them are Doppler measurement of blood flow, which is done by esophageal Doppler, or regional oxygen saturation and echocardiogram. So as you see, the echocardiogram, although is an excellent tool to measure non-invasively, but it does not give you continuous monitoring. It is a snapshot. So every time operator has to do the measurement. So it is not a continuous. That is the only limitation. Otherwise, it is an excellent tool to overall look and assess the whole cardiac function. So see, for cardiac output, albeit we say that these are the invasive and non-invasive, there are a lot of clinical sort of a science that you could look at to assess cardiac output. So it's very important for all the intensive care trainees to pay attention to all the clinical measures of cardiac output. So someone is very drowsy with cold peripheries itself will tell you his cardiac output is very low and there's not enough of cerebral blood flow happening. And peripheries. So it is always very important. And when I'm talking to my trainees, it's always good to touch the patient's feet and see whether the feet is warm or cold. If someone has a very ice cold feet with a low blood pressure, with a cardiac history, then you know already that his cardiac output is very low. There's not enough perfusion that's happening in the periphery. So simple clinical tools also should be utilized to ascertain the cardiac output. And most important, urine output. So someone remains oliguric with cold peripheries, you know for sure that cardiac output is compromised and it needs to be optimized. And mixed venous oxygen saturation is one of them. And biochemical, when you do a blood gas in someone who is hypotensive with cold peripheries, if lactate is high, it is an indicator that your perfusion is not happening. So don't undermine these important clinical measures which are readily available on any bedside to ascertain and determine that possibly the patient is in a low cardiac output state. So this is a very important physiological aspect of cardiac output, because the cardiac output, there are two important variables that determine cardiac output. One is the blood pressure and the blood flow. So this relationship we need to have a sound understanding for determining the cardiac output. So cardiac output simply is stroke volume into heart rate. And so in the for the stroke volume, so there is a systolic component and a diastolic component. And for the stroke volume, there are volume factors and there are pressure factors. So just focus on this curve. So when there is a stroke volume, so there is a volume factors and there is flow factors. So when the blood is ejected into the aorta, so a waveform of this nature is created. So the ejection part is represented by this forward compression, where there is a thrust of blood into the proximal aorta, and the peak systolic output is obviously limited by the aortic compliance, because otherwise, if you do not have a compliance, this curve keeps shooting up. So there is a limitation of this curve to be peaking up by the aortic compliance. So the compliance of the vessels determine how much blood the bed can accommodate. and once the peak is reached, there is a forward decompression, because once the during the systolic upstroke there is a ejection of the blood into the proximal aorta, and then during the diastole, so there is a filling of it and there is a forward decompression that happens. So once there is a filling of aorta and forward decompression happens, there is something called back compression, so back compression wave. So this typically happens from the aorta or from the major vessels when the blood is being distributed into various other smaller arteries. So when there is a change in the caliber from the aorta, there is a backward compression. So there is some amount of blood which tends to be pushed backwards, that we call as backward compression. Why we are talking about all this? So this forward compression and the forward decompression and back compression, all these sort of tend to overall determine your stroke volume. And as you see, this is also influenced by resistance and compliance of the aorta. And as the age of the patient increases, the compliance of the aorta sort of reduces. So that leads to systolic peak excursion, and this forward decompression also is something that could be limited. So these are some of the physiological determinants which determine the effectiveness of the stroke volume. So for all of you to simply remember, stroke volume has both systolic component, which is the forward compression, then it has a diastolic component, which is forward decompression, and this forward decompression is influenced by backward compression and the compliance of the aorta. So those are the physiological aspect one should be remember. So why should we measure cardiac output? Because cardiac output gives you an indication of the overall effectiveness of the circulation that is happening. Because in any patient who comes to ICU, if blood pressure is low, there are basically two major divisions as to why blood pressure is low. One is due to low cardiac output, which we have just spoken, or there is reduced systemic vascular resistance, which typically happens in septic shock, where all your peripheral vessels get dilated, and that leads to fall in blood pressure. So when there is reduced cardiac output, the result or the detrimental effect of this is reduce in the oxygen delivery. Because there is reduced oxygen delivery at the tissue and cellular level, the anaerobic metabolism sets in, lactate goes up, and organ dysfunction happens. So this is our understanding. In any hypotension, the two main physiological aspects is heart not pumping out enough blood, or the peripheral vessels being dilated. So that is something which we need to keep as a basics of hypotension. Okay, so now when we talk about stroke volume, we saw that it is influenced by your forward compression and forward decompression and backward compression. So with regards to the cardiac aspect, there are three entities that determine stroke volume: preload, afterload, and contractility. I'm sure you have heard about these entities. So what is preload? So preload is simply an indication of end diastolic volume in the right ventricle. So the amount of blood that gets accommodated in the right ventricle, and this is determined by the right atrial pressure, which is again determined by the venous return into the right atrium. So preload is a representative of the venous return, which is having an effect on the end diastolic volume. So that is represented by preload. And as you see, preload pictorially is depicted as end diastolic volume, which determines your preload. How effectively your venous return is happening determines the preload. And what is afterload? So afterload is simply end systolic left ventricular wall stress that has a direct bearing on the arterial pressure in the aorta. So it is basically the pressure against which the left ventricle has to contract, and the stress that it has to generate for the blood to be thrusted out into the aorta represents afterload. So if the stress of the left ventricle is more, then your arterial pressure or the systemic vascular resistance also tends to go up. So your stress is more, your afterload is more, which means there is lot more resistance against which the left ventricle has to work, and that is the determinant of afterload. So afterload is simply end systolic wall stress or resistance. So these two things every trainee can sort of entrench or encrypt in their mind, that your preload is end diastolic volume and afterload is end systolic wall stress. So the resistance against which the left ventricle has to work and the stress that it takes is what determines the afterload. So the stroke volume, why these two are important? because stroke volume is simply difference between end diastolic volume and end systolic volume. So that is why we need to understand which are the anatomical areas of the heart which influence the preload and afterload. So are there any physiological variables affecting cardiac output? We know the disease of the myocardium affects cardiac output, or any condition that causes myocardial dysfunction influences cardiac output in a disease state. But physiologically, there are certain variables which affect the cardiac output. Age is one of them which can affect the cardiac output, or the basal metabolic rate, hypometabolic or hypermetabolic also has a bearing, because if you are hypercatabolic, obviously, you have a huge sympathetic surge, your cardiac output goes up, which typically happens in a burns patient or a sepsis patient. So, metabolic rate determines, and body mass index also is an important variable which determines cardiac output, and physical exercise. So, these are some of the physical sort of a situations or a variables which increase the cardiac output. Like with age, cardiac output comes down. With basal metabolism, if it is a high metabolism, obviously cardiac output increases. So if you are doing an exercise, obviously you would increase the cardiac output. So these are some of the physiological variations that affect cardiac output. So now we'll move slowly into how do we measure invasively the cardiac output. So the conventional modality or the popular modality how we were measuring cardiac output is by creating thermodilution curve by using PA catheter. So if you look at this picture, so this red sort of a line you see is the PA catheter, which goes from the RA to RV to the pulmonary artery and to the distal pulmonary artery where it wedges. So basically, the whole concept of thermodilution is you inject the cold saline you inject into the right atrium, and you see the change in the temperature as a function of time that happens, for which a thermodilution curve is created. And then there are certain arithmetical equations that are used to determine the cardiac output. So basically the cardiac output is measured from the change in the temperature of the injectate that happens as a function of time. So that is the most important thing. So they use this Stewart-Hamilton equation where Qt is cardiac output, and it uses this arithmetical equation to determine cardiac output, where V is the volume of saline that you inject into the right atrium, and Tb is the temperature of the blood, and Ti is the temperature of the injectate. And this is most important. Change in temperature as function of time will create a thermodilution curve, and based on the thermodilution curve, all the other variables are derived. So the calculated variable when we put a PI catheter is pulmonary artery pressure. We calculate cardiac output, we calculate left atrial occlusive pressure. This pressure we calculate, and all the other variables which I'll show in the next slide are derived variables, which means they are calculated from the variables that are measured with PA catheter. Okay. So, and as you see this arrow, if you see, it is the change in temperature that happens when the cold injectate is infused into the right atria, and the temperature change that happens when it enters into the pulmonary artery. So that difference is taken, a curve is created using this arithmetical equation, cardiac output is calculated. So these are the derived variables from what you calculate. So obviously you first calculate cardiac output. So cardiac index is calculated by cardiac output divided by body surface area, and stroke volume index is calculated because you have got cardiac index. Cardiac index divided by heart rate you do, and you get a stroke volume index. And stroke volume resistant index you get it by this equation, mean arterial pressure minus right atrial pressure divided. So the whole T net of measuring all these variables comes from measuring your cardiac index, as you see. And pulmonary vascular resistance index is calculated by pulmonary artery pressure minus pulmonary artery occlusive pressure divided by cardiac index, and so on and so forth. So this is left ventricular stroke work index, which is stroke volume index into mean arterial pressure. Right ventricular stroke volume index is stroke volume index into pulmonary artery pressure. So these are all the derived variables which you get after you have measured your cardiac output and cardiac index. So these remain the key elements out of which you derive all these variables. And I'm sure all trainees who have entered intensive care would know all these formulas, because these are commonly asked in any of the entrances you give, entrance exams you would give. So what is important when we are interpreting this is cardiac index is important, because cardiac index is low, then you know there is a myocardial dysfunction and cardiac output is low. When cardiac index is low, then you would expect SVRI to be high. So if cardiac index is high, then you would expect SVRI to be low. That is a typical sepsis situation where cardiac index seems to be high and SVRI, because the whole vessels are dilated, SVRI will be low. So on and so forth. So that is the interpretation of these variables. So what are the problems one would face while doing this thermodilution technique to calculate cardiac output? So there are a lot of fallacies, because it may not be a true representative of cardiac output, because there can be difference in the cardiac output of the left ventricle when compared to the right ventricle. So it may not necessarily indicate the overall cardiac output, it may not really tell you which part of the ventricle is more affected. And this may be fallacious when there is a huge regurgitant lesions like tricuspid regurgitation, and there may be variability between the stroke volume and the pulse pressure variation. And most importantly, there can be variation in the body temperature. Suppose someone has a very high fever or hypothermia, because your whole cardiac output derivation happens from the change in the temperature from the RA to the pulmonary artery. That change in temperature may not be very significant when someone is running a high fever or when is hypothermic. So that also has a bearing on fallacious cardiac output that we would interpret. So these are some of the fallacies. So that is about typical pulmonary artery catheter. So now this is again, as you see, this is continuous pulmonary artery thermodilution cardiac output, where again this change in the temperature is done in a cyclical way, and the temperature change in this, because it is doing continuous cardiac output, it may be much smaller, and there may be a thermal noise that could be. See, this is a typical thermodilution curve that gets created when a cold injectate is infused into the right atrium. Okay, and so what trainees have to remember is, it is the change in temperature as a function of time that is captured, from which the cardiac output is measured and cardiac index is calculated, and all the other subsequent variables like stroke volume, resistance index, and pulmonary vascular resistance index are derived. So transpulmonary thermodilution is another technique which we typically do by using Pico catheter. So basically here you look at the change in temperature between the venous and the arterial at the arterial tip. So here you have an arterial line which we put into the femoral artery. So as you see here, it is put in the brachial artery. Then a cold injectate is given into the vein. See here you are giving it into the femoral vein, and you look at the change in temperature at the arterial end, and then a thermodilution curve is created and cardiac output is calculated. But because here the transit time is huge from the venous to the arterial circulation, the wave that is created is much smaller than the pulmonary artery catheter, where you have a better thermodilution curve. So this typical modality we use is the Pico catheters, and we used to use a lot in Australia where I was training. So even here you get a lot of derived variables. So what you basically say, you inject uh, bolus saline into the right atrium. Okay, then the bolus enters right ventricle, and it determines the right ventricular end diastolic volume. Then it enters the pulmonary circulation, where your pulmonary blood volume is determined. From there it enters left atrium, end diastolic volume. Then it enters left ventricular end diastolic volume. So wherever this injectate enters, so these volumes are captured from the thermodilution curve based on the temperature change that happens. So here there are two variables. Like there I said, it's the temperature of the change in the temperature as a function of time between the right atrium and pulmonary artery is what determines your cardiac output. Here there are two important things that we take. We take mean transit time of the cold injectate and the downslope time. So taking these into capturing these two variables, arithmetical equations are used to derive all these volumes here. So what are the derived variables that we derive? So we derive intrathoracic thermal time, which is equal to cardiac output into mean transit time. Okay, so intrathoracic thermal volume is RA, right atrial end diastolic volume, plus RV end diastolic volume, plus all this left atrial end diastolic. So you have pulmonary thermal volume, which is derived from cardiac output multiplied by downslope time. So only thing you have to remember is mean transit time and downslope time. So mean transit time will determine your whole intrathoracic thermal volume. Your pulmonary thermal volume is determined by downslope time. So these are the two times that you have to remember, and these are all automatically done. One does not have to sit and calculate. Once the curve is captured, so the algorithms run automatically, and all these measures are given. So global end diastolic volume is intrathoracic thermal volume, which is addition of all this minus pulmonary. The blank one you see is the pulmonary thermal volume. So intrathoracic blood volume is 1.25 into global end diastolic volume. So these are all the derived variables that you get from this PICO. So you don't need to remember, but what you need to remember is the principle of how different compartments of preload and afterload are derived from this. And the other distinct advantage of PICO in comparison to your pulmonary artery catheter is extravascular lung water is collected. So this is pulmonary artery, this is the RA, this is the RV, this is the LA, this is the LV, right? So extravascular lung water is something that is calculated by intrathoracic thermal volume minus intrathoracic blood volume. Or it can even be calculated by intrathoracic thermal volume minus 1.25 to global end diastolic. All this you don't have to memorize. So once you create a thermodilution, automatically the machine does all these configurations and these numbers are given. But you need to understand how these are derived as a concept. And for this, two important variables are captured when you do the thermodilution curve, which is mean transit time and downslope time. Based on that, cardiac output is calculated. Based on that, different volumes are calculated. That's all you need to remember. So then we'll move to the LIDCO. LIDCO is lithium dilution cardiac. So far we have seen we were injecting cold saline. Pulmonary artery we were injecting cold saline, and in transpulmonary thermodilution we injected cold saline, and we looked at the temperature change from the venous to the arterial circulation. But in LIDCO we inject lithium solution, and Nernst equation is used for ion sensitive electrode at arterial line to determine the cardiac output. But the disadvantage is it does not give extravascular lung water. So there are three components as you saw in invasive. One is pulmonary artery catheter, one is PICO catheter, which is transpulmonary thermodilution, and LIDCO. So LIDCO did not catch up with popularity because of the use of lithium solution. So what are the factors? So now we need to understand, are these really time tested, and are there any factors that influence the measurements? So the factors that affect the accuracy of thermodilution is, if you injected volume is not correct, because there will be a very specified volume that you need to inject. If you inject less volume, then our understanding is there is smaller change in the temperature that happens between RA to pulmonary artery in case of pulmonary artery catheter, or from the venous to the arterial circulation in PICO, and that can lead to overestimation of cardiac output. And if the temperature change from the injected to the blood temperature, there is a huge difference. Suppose if someone has a high fever, so there is increased sort of a difference that gets evident in the temperature change, and that also can overestimate cardiac output. And the indicator that you administer can get sequestrated, or there can be third spacing loss, and there can be recirculation of the indicator. So these are all some of the fallacies of these thermodilution techniques, because whatever you inject, some things may escape out from the circulation, and that may influence the thermodilution curve, and that may overestimate or underestimate the cardiac output. So those are all about the thermodilution techniques. Now we'll move into the pulse contour analysis. So basically here our understanding is we capture the aortic pulse pressure, we take the area under the curve and correlate it as a measure of stroke volume, right? So the way we calculate is, so this is the formula that we use to look at the pulse contour analysis, which is calculated by resistance into compliance of the aorta, and cardiac output is calculated by mean arterial pressure divided by this compliance and this resistance component. So basically use mathematical equations to derive cardiac output based on capturing the area under the curve of the stroke volume that is derived. So the way it happens is, so this is the waveform of the aortic pulse pressure that you would build, and by using Windcastle approach you capture this area, and you take it as a measure of stroke volume. So again, so this shape, as we saw in the first physiological way, is determined by your forward compression. So this particular curve determines the forward compression. This is the peak systolic excursion, and this is the backward compression. And you take these into consideration, and you derive stroke volume by capturing the area, because this area under the curve is determined by this forward compression, backward compression, and the peak systolic excursion. And so there is increased systolic pressure or increased pulse pressure will sort of have a effect on disrupting the downslope deceleration. Okay, so this is diastolic pressure deceleration. So this is the diastolic pressure deceleration. So if you have an increased systolic pressure or increased pulse pressure, so this can have an influence on disrupting this curve, and your cardiac output obviously changes accordingly. And this curve is influenced or it is augmented by vasoconstriction. So if you have a vasoconstriction, obviously I said there will be more peaking of this curve, and there is diastolic pressure deceleration also gets affected when there is vasoconstriction, and it is blunted obviously when there is vasodilation. So basically your peripheral vascular integrity will determine the shape of the curve, and that shape of the curve will determine your cardiac output. So basically this pulse contour analysis will be heavily influenced by your vasoconstriction or vasodilation. So which means to say the use of say vasopressors or vasodilators will have a bearing on your cardiac output, because that will alter the shape of this curve and the area captured under the curve, and that will have an influence. So empiric approach, so this is a Windkessel approach. So empiric approach is just equating stroke volume as a standard deviation of arterial pressure, which is proportional to the pulse pressure. So this is the Windkessel, means it is basically an instrument used by these fire people. So the way this Windkessel is compared to the circulation is, if you take this as a heart, so and you have this aorta which is coming. So aortic the blood in the aorta is taken as reservoir pressure, and the peripheral vessels are taken as wave pressure, and these two are separated, which has a correlation to the systolic component and the diastolic component. And these are separated: reservoir pressure, which is influenced by the change in the caliber, and the wave pressure, which is influenced by the attenuation and augmentation of the peripheral arteries. As I showed you in the last slide, your vasoconstriction and vasodilation will have an influence on the wave pressure, and the reservoir pressure is basically dependent on the systolic forward compression and the peak systolic excursion. So these two are looked at as separate entity and cardiac output determined. So that is Windkessel approach. So the simplest way for us is to just correlate stroke volume as a standard deviation of arterial pressure, which is directly proportional to the pulse pressure. So for all the listeners, the simple way of remembering this, the whole pulse contour analysis is by taking the area under the curve, and we need to understand the different components of the waveform which are influenced by the peripheral vasoconstriction and dilatation. If you remember that, that should be good enough. And the mathematical connotations that are used is the Windkessel approach. So if you remember that much, that should be good enough. So what are the factors affecting the accuracy of pulse contour analysis? So again, the non-linearity of aortic, because aortic compliance is not linear and the compliance keep changing with the age. So there can be reduced compliance with increased age, which determines your systolic forward compression and the peak systolic excursion, which has a bearing on the cardiac output. And the damped waveforms and inadequate detection of pulse rate. And aortic pathology, obviously if you have aortic regurgitation, aortic, because you're all basing it on the waveform that is built in relation to the blood flow into the aorta. So obviously if you have a regurgitation or stenosis, so that would reflect erroneous interpretation of cardiac output. So that's about your pulse contour analysis. Now we'll move to the non-invasive. So non-invasive, the one which is most popular, which I believe is the easiest, is echocardiogram. Okay, so Doppler measurement of cardiac output. So most of the trainees who are listening to this, you would be familiar with the echocardiogram. So where you do a parasternal long axis view, and this is a cross, and there you get a LVOT. So this is LVOT where you take the cross sectional area diameter. So for males it is 2 centimeters, for females it is 1.75 generally. But you measure the diameter, and then your stroke volume is simply left ventricular outflow tract cross sectional area, which you measure. For this is a diameter. So cross sectional area is measured by 3.14 into diameter of this divided by 2 to the square of 2. I'll show you the formula. So you calculate left ventricular outflow tract cross sectional area into left ventricular outflow tract velocity time integral. So once you got stroke volume, cardiac output is simply stroke volume into heart rate. You will get heart rate which is measured from the patient or which is shown on the monitor, and then you would multiply. So this is the easiest way to calculate cardiac output on the bedside. So how do you calculate LVOT VTI? So we put the sample. This is a 5-chamber view. This is the LA, LV, RA, RV. So this is the LVOT. You keep the sample proximal to the proximal to the left ventricular outflow tract, and then you put a pulse wave Doppler, you get a waveform. So you track this waveform, you get a LVOT VTI. So I'm sure many of you would have done this. So it's very simple. So you just put a 5-chamber V, put a sample, put a pulse wave, you'll get these waveforms. You trace this waveform from the baseline to the tip through and through, you'll get a LVOT VTI. So this number, whatever you get, you multiply by LVOT cross sectional area, that gives you stroke volume. But the problem with this is it is not real time, because every time you need to calculate cardiac output, you have to go with echo probe and measure this, and there can be inter-observer variability, and sometimes, especially in post-surgical patients or someone who is on high PEEP, so it is very difficult to get a good echo window. So that also can be a problem. So these are some of the confounders that we find. So the cross-sectional area, as I said, is calculated by 3.14, and the diameter you take divided by 2 to the square root, okay, to the power of 2. So this is the way we calculate cross-sectional area. So LVOT cross-sectional into LVOT VTI gives you stroke volume. So that's the simplest way. So that's the very easiest and non-invasive way of calculating cardiac output. Then esophageal Doppler is another easy technique to calculate cardiac output, and this also gives continuous cardiac output. And this typically is done in UK, where Dopplers are put into esophagus. So we put a esophageal Doppler with 4 to 5 hertz into the esophagus, and that gives you this stroke volume measurements. So it is calculated by F source is the frequency from the source, and this is the reflected frequency, and this is the concentration, and cos theta is the angulation. So C is the speed of ultrasound in blood, which is 1540 meter per second. Cos theta is the angle of insonation of the esophageal Doppler. So stroke volume is calculated by same like echo. See, echo you got LVOT VTI, here you get velocity ejection time. So velocity ejection time is calculated by the waveform that is created by putting the esophageal Doppler into aortic cross sectional area. Very similar to the echo principle. But see, this is how. So you have a esophageal Doppler. So this is directed against the aortic valve, aorta, and the velocity of blood is measured, and velocity ejection time is created. So the problem with the factors that can influence the measurement of cardiac output is if you have this Doppler which is not aligned properly to the aortic blood flow, then it can lead to underestimation of the stroke volume. Or you may have sometimes the esophageal Doppler which is insonating the wrong blood vessels. It is not necessarily insonating the aorta. So basically our whole, see, the pulse contour analysis also is derived from plotting the area under the curve of the aorta. That is our hypothesis. So even here the aortic blood flow is tracked and ejection systolic time is created. But if you are insonating, say, another internal jugular vein or some other vein, then it will give you a wrong estimation of the stroke volume. So that's also reasonably non-invasive, because you just have to put a probe into the esophagus. Now we'll come into the bioimpedance. So some centers have used this and this is also fairly simple sort of a technique where you put probes on the chest. So the whole understanding of bioimpedance is the variability in intrathoracic blood volume that we spoke is related to the impedance, to the current, which is determined by the Ohm's law. So basically, you pass a current into the body and you look at the resistance that the body shows to the flow of current in different areas, and based on the algorithms, you derive the cardiac output. So it is basically the resistance of your own body system to the alternating current is what is utilized to determine the cardiac output. So very simply, I've just put it in a very pictorial way for you. So body is basically here divided into two components. So if you look at human body, in human body there is a high impedance compartment and there is a low impedance compartment. So this is the basis of your bioimpedance. So low impedance components are all the blood flows. All the blood vessels, all the flows that are happening in the body are categorized into low impedance, and this has to increase with systole. High impedance are air and cardiac muscles, and the impedance resistance is 1275 ohms per centimeter. For cardiac muscle it is 750 ohms. Low impedance is blood and plasma. So by understanding this concept, you determine cardiac output based on the differential conduction of current. Okay, so here you keep electrodes. So these are the positions you keep electrodes. You keep electrodes on the lower chest on two sides, then you keep electrodes in the neck. So basically you look at that impedance change or the resistance change that happens from here to here and see and measure the cardiac output. Okay, so you put a current of 1.4 to 1.8 milliamperes here and you measure it. What is the difference here? You see, because of the resistance that the body confers, so there will be a differential sort of a current, and that is calculated and derived, and cardiac output is derived from that difference based on this understanding of high impedance and low impedance structures. So basically it is the bioimpedance, which is Z0, is inversely proportional to the total fluid content conducting the current. Okay, so basically this whole compartment, you take the amount of blood flow that is conducting the current and your impedance is inversely proportional. Okay, and the change in impedance is equal to systolic increase in the cross sectional area of the aorta. Okay, so for all the listeners, the simplest way is to remember this figure where your body compartments is divided into high compartment, low impedance and high impedance. Low impedance are all the blood flowing structures, and you look at the difference in the impedance from the electrodes placed in the lower part of the chest to the neck and see what is the differential sort of a current being conducted. Based on that, you derive the cardiac output. So if you understand that much, that should be good enough. And this is the arithmetical equation that is used to derive your cardiac output, where P is specific resistivity of blood, L is the thoracic length, Z0 is the basal thoracic impedance, BET is the ventricular ejection time, and max dz by dt is maximum rate of impedance change during systolic upstroke. So is that clear? So it must be pretty clear. Basically, you are looking at the difference in the resistance that is happening from one part of the chest to the neck, and that you are basically understanding by the low impedance structures within the body, which is the blood flow systems. So your impedance is inversely proportional to the total fluid content which is conducting the current in that part of the chest where you have placed the electrodes. Okay, so what are the factors that affect the accuracy of bioimpedance? Electrode placement, because if you have placed electrodes erroneously, it may misinterpret the cardiac output, and if you have a lot of edema, tissue edema, then your conduction of the current can be affected. And fluid shifts also can have a bearing on measurement of bioimpedance and the movement artifact, because this gives a small amount of current. As you see, 1.4 to 1.8 ampere it gives, 1.4 to 1.8 ampere. So which means it can be discomforting for the patient, and patient may feel that prickly sensation and he can be very restless and moving. So that also can have a bearing on measurement of the cardiac output. So now coming to the last bit is the regional oxygenation. So this is another non-invasive way of measuring cardiac output. Here we use near-infrared spectroscopy to look at the differential absorption of infrared between the oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin. And by capturing the differential absorption of the infrared, you derive the regional saturation and assessment of cardiac output. So basically, this is pictorially shown where you have an incident light, then some of the light is absorbed, and then there is a light that is reflected out. So you take the difference and use this modified Beer-Lambert law to derive the differential pathway factor and measure the cardiac output. So and this measurement is done using this equation of absorption scattering, which is this is the extinction coefficient, this is the concentration of light, this is the distance the light has to travel, and this is the differential path factor. So this is the equation that is used. Basically, for all the listeners, just understand regional saturation is the differential absorption of light between oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and calculating the regional saturation and applying this modified Lambert law to derive the cardiac output. So that's all you need to remember. So what are the factors affecting near infrared, sample volume, and arterial venous partitioning? Because if you are directing this probe in a place where there is disproportion arterious and venous partitioning, then obviously it has a bearing on misinterpreting the cardiac output. Because 70% of the cerebral blood flow is venous, so obviously that may not be the best place to determine your cardiac output. Okay, so to end the topic, so the most important practically used tools adopting all the principles that I spoke are pulmonary artery catheter, which is getting obsolete. As you see, pulmonary artery catheter gives you a lot more information on right atrial pressure and pulmonary artery occlusive pressure and right ventricular end diastolic volume, but it does not give you indication of fluid responsiveness. It can give you stroke volume, and it does give you an estimate of afterload by measuring SVR. And transpulmonary thermodynamics, PICO, it gives you global end diastolic volume, intrathoracic blood volume. In addition to all what pulmonary artery catheter gives, it also gives extravascular lung water. So flow track is based on the principle of your capturing the area under the curve of stroke volume. So stroke volume is derived by capturing the area under the arterial waveform or the pulse contour analysis. So again, so here it does not give you any indices on right atrial pressure, anything to do with right atrium. It only gives systolic pressure variation and pulse pressure variation. It can give you an estimate of stroke volume and systolic volume and stroke volume resistance. So this is esophageal Doppler. So as you see, it gives peak velocity and it gives you the stroke volume. Okay, and this is NICO is the non-invasive cardiac output. So it doesn't give anything to do with the right atrium or right ventricular indices. It only gives you stroke volume. And NICO is based on the infrared sort of a spectroscopy, and it is a very non-invasive. You just put like a pulse oximeter and then you measure the stroke volume. Okay, so that is in essence the practically available tools. So right now, I think what predominantly we are relying now is the simplistic flow track, because what it needs is only an arterial line, and it will capture the area under the curve, and it gives you your stroke pressure variation and your systolic pressure variation and pulse pressure variation and stroke volume. So this is something which is more easier, and NICO is available in few places. It's very simplistic. It doesn't give you any of your RV or RA indices. Neither does it give you systemic vascular resistance index. It only gives you stroke volume. So this esophageal Doppler is predominantly used in UK is what I hear. It basically gives aortic blood flow variation, and it gives you flow time, and it will calculate stroke volume. It gives you stroke volume. Okay, so just the normal hemodynamic variables, which I think all of you should be knowing, is mainly cardiac output. Keep in mind 4 to 8 liters per minute is what you would consider as normal, and cardiac index is 2.5 to 4 liters per minute. And these are all the other normal indices that one needs to keep in mind. So, but I think predominantly if you remember cardiac output and cardiac index, I think as a reference, it should be good enough. So in summary, so there are various determinants of cardiac output. So the easiest one for anyone to look into bedside is physiological determinants of cardiac output, which is how the mentation is, how the peripheries are, and how is the urine output happening. And most importantly, don't forget to look at the lactate in the blood gas, because that itself may tell you what is your cardiac output. And measured cardiac output, you may have to use one of these tools to ascertain and determine your cardiac output. But for all the measured variables, there are that many number of confounders which can erroneously interpret the cardiac output. So one should be aware of all the limitations of all these modalities. So there are various tools available to monitor cardiac output, and we went through all of them, invasive and non-invasive. So nowadays the popular one that we tend to adopt are the least invasive ones, which would, for me, the most useful would be still the echocardiogram. It is the much easier way, or flow tracks are being used because that's the simplistic way. You just put an outline and connect to the probe, and it gives you stroke volume variation and systolic pressure variation. So what determines which tool you'll pick up is ease of use, awareness of limitations, and obviously in India it is important to understand the cost, because PICO usage can be quite expensive, and institutional availability which influence the regional practice. And please remember, there is extensive algorithms that are used, mathematical modeling, physiological assumptions are made, and derived algorithms. So, and these are used to arrive at values in many. So basically, you're using a lot of mathematical modeling, physiological assumptions, and derived algorithm to arrive at values, which can be fallacious many a times. And extensive validation is needed for generalizability and incorporation of newer tools. Thank you very much.